Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to The Pugilist, Episode 4, Badger. Arthur sat perched on one of his chairs, thinking. The fight with the dealer had left him a bit shaken. Up to this point, he had just been dealing with gang members and addicts. Those he was able to handle without a problem. Fighting a guy who was strong enough to have a career in the octagon was disturbing, or at least unsettling, if not outright disturbing. And then there's what he said during the interrogation. There was a man somewhere in Freedom City called Badger who took in all the Macs that entered the city. The dealer told him he thinks the shipments come in late, around 3 in the morning on Sunday morning. He said he thinks that's when the shipments come in because Badger sends out the deliveries to the couple of dealers every Monday morning, and he can't imagine that the shipments would come in and that Badger would sit on them for more than a day or so. Not only would that be extremely dangerous if the FCPD were to bust in on him, but every day that Max isn't in the hands of the dealers is a day that Badger's not making money off of Max. And on top of that, the dock workers were generally religious people, and so they usually were at church on Sunday. So early Sunday morning, they would be asleep. Thinking about that whole conversation, Arthur couldn't find a fault in the argument, assuming the inciting statement was true. It was Tuesday now, so Arthur would have to wait. And wait he would, not taking up the mask until he was ready to face Badger. But come Sunday morning, Arthur would find himself down at the docks and would try to end Max in the city for good. Barbra Kane found herself down at the docks and hating every minute of it. What do we got, Dave? Why are we here? She asked as she walked up to her partner. He looked at her with a smile that was far too bright for the pre-dawn that it was, and he handed her a coffee. Glad to see you here. I was afraid it would mess with your beauty sleep. And then his face turned serious, and he pointed with his other hand, holding his coffee, down toward a warehouse. So, for the last almost 2 months, mob-affiliated people have been found beaten to death near mob-affiliated warehouses. Some sort of massive blunt force trauma. It's been really hard to pin down so far because it's close, but not quite like anything our forensic guys have seen before. There's been a breakthrough in the last couple of days because someone figured out the wounds on a few of them look like a modified version of what's called the butterfly effect. Barbra raised an eyebrow at this as she took a tentative sip of her coffee. The butterfly effect that states if a butterfly flaps its wings, it can create a hurricane on the other side of the world. She was clearly not buying that explanation. Dave grinned for a second. No, not that butterfly effect. This one comes from explosions. When a human is hit by a shockwave that's powerful enough, it can kill. And when it's that powerful, there can be a resulting bruise on the dead body that is apparently reminiscent of a butterfly. So we've had this breakthrough in that case, and it's happened again, and for some reason they need to call in more people. Barbra was starting to get a little impatient. She knew she was one of the last people to arrive, but she wanted to be up to speed and working on whatever there was to work on. The pugilist guy she had been working on had been quiet for longer than normal, which complicated that case in many different ways. And now she's being temporarily assigned to this case in which she just wanted to finish and both get back to the other case, but to have the satisfaction of a win under her belt. Well, yes and no, came Dave's response. When she glared daggers at him, he held up his hands and continued. Something has happened at this mob warehouse, and the force is on high alert for things happening at mob warehouses to mobsters due to that case. But this is a very different MO. Let's go and I'll just show you. And walk they did. When they got close to the warehouse, the carnage took Barbra's breath away. 20 years on the force had shown her many things, and she'd been hardened to most things. The trail of bodies, each shot in the head, and most shot in other places like knees and such, was something new. All told, inside and out of the warehouse, there were almost 20 bodies, and the oddest part was all of the various drugs and guns and furs and all the other illegal paraphernalia you would expect in a mob warehouse was there. All of it just piled up in a cleared spot in the middle of the main room of the building. Not gone, not disturbed. At the sight of everything just piled there, Barbra raised her eyebrow again. Dave saw it and nodded. Yeah, that's part of why we're here. It doesn't appear that anything was taken. It was called in from a payphone, like our Pugilist case. And it's an attack on a mob warehouse like the other case. So there are a few potential crossovers. And just the level of destruction, this warrants a big response. Do they think our pugilist is involved? If so, they're full of shit. There's nothing in that profile that would suggest this level of violence. Even more than that, he's never, ever killed. Dave had his turn to raise his eyebrow. That we know of. And before Barbra could protest, he continued, They don't think so. For once, they agree with you on something. She nods at this, glad to hear it. And what's the story with the gunshots? Dave shrugged. So far, they all appear to be the same type of handgun. It's as far as we've gotten. But ballistics will come back soon, and my gut says they're going to be all a match for the same gun. Let's face it, either it was one guy with one gun, or several guys who all happen to have the same type of gun. Which is more likely? Barbra looked at the scene again. She wasn't sure which was more likely. Arthur found the place he was searching for, an open spot near one of the small docks. A cigar boat would dock here and would be unloaded. What was helpful was it was near a small series of jetties that would help cover the boat. As he was looking around, something caught his eye for a second on the side of a nearby jetty. It quickly resolved into a person pulling themselves out of the water and charging at him. Just before contact would have been made, the man swung open-handed at Arthur. The moonlight glinted oddly off the person's fingertips, causing Arthur to dodge the blow rather than take a swipe to the torso. It took him a minute to realize that instead of the end of this person's fingers, there were just claws, for lack of a better term. Arthur shot out a jab to keep the attacker at bay. Although he didn't connect, it created a bit of space between them. Seconds later, pain exploded along the front of Arthur's chest as the next clawing attack scrapes across, coming from nowhere. Taking a moment, Arthur shook off the pain and shot out a body cross and connected solidly to the man's torso, to no apparent effect. The next raking claw sends Arthur sprawling to the ground, fighting to keep his wits about him as his body burned. As he was laying there, the man stooped low over him. "Without knowing it, you told me which dealer is breakable. Let me return the help by letting you live. But remember, I run Max in this city, and it is here to stay." With that, the man, Badger apparently, walked out of Arthur's vision. The next several hours were a blurry haze of snapshots. He lay dockside for a long time, though he slipped out in and out of consciousness more times than he could count, so he had no idea how long he actually laid there. Then a woman found him. It was starting to be light then. Sirens. He heard sirens. He remembered being in an ambulance, but not getting into or out of it. Then people all around and moving ceiling. Finally, he woke up in a hospital room. That much was clear within seconds of looking around. And sitting in a chair in the corner was the woman he remembered from this morning. And seeing her this time, her name came to his mind. Detective Barbra Kane stood up and walked over to him. "Good, you're up. Mr. Yell, you were found in a very compromising situation this morning. I hope you appreciate the gravity of your situation." Arthur just looked at her. "Am I under arrest?" Barbra sat down, this time in a chair next to his hospital bed. "Well, Arthur, that very much depends on how this conversation goes." And thank you for listening to The Pugilist, Episode 4, Badger. Make sure to tune in February 20th for Issue 5, Interrogation.